Thessaly was 19 years old, and she had learned to measure time in blows. She knew exactly how long the sound of a bottle opening lasted before her mother came looking for her. She knew how many steps it took to reach her room without making a sound on the creaking floor. She knew how to cover a fresh bruise over an old one so the colors wouldn't reveal the frequency. What she didn't know was that outside, in a black car, a man had been watching her for weeks, and that tonight, he had made a decision that would change everything. The kitchen sink was running, and Thessaly stood before it with her hands submerged in water that had gone cold 15 minutes ago. She wasn't washing dishes anymore. She was calculating. If she turned off the water now, her mother would hear the silence and come to check. If she stayed here too long, her mother would accuse her of wasting time. The bruise on her left shoulder throbbed where it pressed against the cabinet. Purple turning to yellow at the edges, 4 days old now, shaped like the handle of a wooden spoon. Thessaly was 19 years old, and she had learned to measure her life in increments of pain. Outside the narrow window above the sink, the street was empty except for a black car idling near the corner. She had seen it there before. Different times, same car. It didn't belong to anyone on this block. She knew every vehicle that parked here, knew the rhythms of her neighbors' comings and goings, the way prisoners knew the routines of their guards. Behind her, the television droned. Her mother's voice cut through it. "You planning to stand there all night?" Thessaly's shoulders tightened, but she didn't turn. "Almost done. Almost." Her mother's laugh was short and bitter. "You're always almost something, almost useful, almost worth the trouble." The words landed like they always did, not sharp enough to cut anymore, just heavy enough to press down on the weight already there. Thessaly had stopped flinching at them years ago. Words were background noise. It was the silences between them that mattered. The pauses, where her mother's mood could shift without warning. She dried her hands on a dish towel that was more stain than fabric, and moved toward the small table where her mother sat, cigarette burning between two fingers, eyes fixed on a game show where people screamed over prizes they would probably never receive. "There's no milk," Thessaly said quietly. Her mother didn't look up. "So, I could go to the corner store. Before it closes." Now her mother's eyes shifted, assessing. Thessaly knew what she was looking for, signs of attitude, hints of defiance, any excuse to justify what came next. Thessaly kept her face neutral, her voice flat. "If you want," her mother said finally, flicking ash into an overflowing tray. "But don't take all night and don't come back with the wrong kind again." Thessaly nodded and moved toward the door, picking up her jacket from the back of a chair. It was too light for the November cold, but it covered her arms. That was what mattered. Outside, the air bit at her face, and she welcomed it. The 20-minute walk to the store and back was the closest thing she had to freedom, a brief suspension of the constant vigilance required inside those four walls. The black car was still there. Thessaly noticed it the way she noticed everything, peripherally, carefully, without drawing attention to the noticing. She walked past it with her head down, hands shoved into her jacket. Pockets, and she felt rather than saw someone inside watching her. She had learned not to make eye contact with men, had learned that attention of any kind was dangerous, that being noticed meant being vulnerable. So she walked like a shadow, like someone trying to take up as little space as possible in the world. The corner store's fluorescent lights hummed overhead as she moved through the aisles. The owner, Mr. Osgood, glanced up from his newspaper and offered a small nod. He had stopped asking how she was years ago. People in this neighborhood had an unspoken agreement. You didn't ask questions about the things you could see, but chose not to see. Thessaly picked up the milk, whole milk, not 2%, not skim, and a box of her mother's preferred cigarettes. She used the crumpled bills her mother had thrown at her before she left, received her change without counting it, and walked back out into the cold. The black car had moved. It was now parked closer to her building, engine still running, exhaust curling into the night air. Thessaly felt the skin on the back of her neck prickle, but she didn't quicken her pace. Drawing attention to fear was as dangerous as drawing attention to hope. She kept her steps even, her breathing steady, and climbed the 3 flights of stairs to the apartment with the groceries clutched against her chest like armor. Her mother was in the same position, though the cigarette was new, and the show had changed. "Took you long enough," she muttered. Thessaly set the milk in the refrigerator and placed the cigarettes on the table. She waited for what came next. The inspection, the inevitable discovery of something wrong. It didn't matter if she had done everything right. Her mother would find something. "You took money from my purse." Thessaly's stomach dropped, but her face stayed still. "No, you gave me—" The slap came fast, familiar. Her head snapped to the side and her ear rang, but she didn't raise her hand to it. Didn't make a sound. Making sounds made it worse. "Don't lie to me," her mother said, her voice not even raised. That was the worst part, the casualness of it. "I'm not stupid. You think I don't count my money? You gave me $15, Thessaly said quietly, eyes on the floor. "For the milk and cigarettes. There's change on the table." Her mother's hand moved again, this time grabbing a fistful of Thessaly's hair and yanking her head back. Thessaly's breath caught, but didn't become a cry. She looked at the ceiling, at the water stain shaped like a face, and waited. "Watch your mouth," her mother said, her breath sour with vodka and smoke. "You think you're smart? You think you know better than me?" "No." "No, what?" "No, ma'am." The grip loosened, and Thessaly was shoved backward. She caught herself on the counter, her hip connecting with the edge hard enough to bloom into another bruise by morning. Her mother returned to her chair, to her show, as if nothing had happened. Thessaly stood there for a moment, her scalp burning, her hip throbbing, and felt the familiar numbness settle over her like a blanket. This was normal. This was every day. This was the shape of her life. And she had long ago stopped imagining it could be different. She went to her room, barely large enough for a mattress on the floor, and a plastic crate where she kept her few belongings, and closed the door as quietly as possible. Locking it would only make things worse later. She sat on the mattress and pulled her knees to her chest, wrapping her arms around them. Through the thin walls, she could hear the television, her mother's occasional cough, the sound of a bottle being opened. And outside, 3 stories down, the quiet idle of an engine that never seemed to turn off. The man in the black car had a name, though few people dared to use it casually. Caspian Nero. He was 34 years old and had been running the Northeast Territory for 6 years, longer than most men in his position survived. He had climbed to power young, not through recklessness, but through a particular kind of controlled precision that made older men nervous and younger men envious. He didn't speak unless necessary, didn't make threats he wouldn't execute, didn't make promises he couldn't keep, and he noticed things. It was a habit born from necessity, from years of reading rooms of Rumpelsaum and reading people, of understanding that survival in his world required seeing what others overlooked. He noticed patterns, inconsistencies, the small tells that revealed larger truths. He had noticed Thessaly 3 weeks ago. It wasn't dramatic. She hadn't stumbled into his path or cried out for help. She had simply existed in the periphery of his awareness. A girl who walked to the corner store every few nights, always at the same time, always in a jacket too thin for the weather, always with her head down. At first, she was just another face in a neighborhood full of them. But then he noticed how she moved, the way she calculated her steps, never rushing, never dawdling, the way she kept her shoulders curved inward, making herself smaller, the way she didn't look at anyone but was clearly aware of everyone. It was the walk of someone who had learned to be invisible. Caspian had seen that walk before, in his own childhood, in the mirror when he was young enough to still flinch, in the men and women who worked for him, the ones who had survived things that left marks deeper than scars. Then, 2 weeks ago, he saw the bruise. She had been reaching up to grab something from a high shelf in the store, Mr. Osgood's place, where Caspian sometimes bought cigarettes he didn't smoke just to have a reason to observe, and her sleeve had ridden up, just for a moment, just long enough. The bruise wrapped around her wrist like a bracelet, purple and green, the distinct shape of fingers that had gripped too hard. Caspian had looked away before she could notice his noticing. Had paid for his cigarettes and left, but the image stayed with him. He began parking on her street more often, not following her. He wasn't a predator, but positioning himself where he could see, where he could confirm or dismiss what he suspected. The confirmations came in small increments, the way she touched her ribs as she walked, wincing when she thought no one was watching, the careful way she sat on the building's front steps when the apartment was too stifling, always choosing the side that didn't put pressure on her left hip. The night he saw her through a gap in the curtains, standing perfectly still while a woman, her mother, he assumed, raged at her, close enough to spit in her face but never quite loud enough for the neighbors to call it a disturbance. Caspian knew domestic situations, knew the unspoken rules of neighborhoods like this. You didn't get involved in what happened behind closed doors. You didn't ask questions. You didn't see what you weren't supposed to see. He also knew that those rules were written by people who had never been on the receiving end of what happened when doors closed. His second-in-command, Lysander, had noticed his new routine. "You got business on Maple Street I should know about?" Lysander asked one night as they sat in the back room of a restaurant that Caspian owned but never ate in. Caspian didn't look up from the ledger he was reviewing. "No. You're there a lot. I'm aware of where I am." Lysander was quiet for a moment, then tried again. "If there's a problem." "There's not." But that wasn't quite true. There was a problem. It just wasn't the kind Lysander would understand. It wasn't about territory, or money, or respect. It was about a girl with bruises she tried to hide, and the particular kind of sick feeling Caspian got in his stomach when he saw someone being systematically broken. He had killed men for less, but this wasn't about killing. It was about something more. Complicated, something that required patience and planning. Because taking someone away from a bad situation wasn't as simple as showing up and making demands. Not if you wanted them to survive what came after. So he watched, and he waited, and he began to formulate a plan that had nothing to do with the business he ran and everything to do with the man he had decided to be when he wasn't being that business. Thessaly's mother had not always been cruel. There had been a time, vague now, like a dream half remembered, when her mother had smiled, when she had sung while cooking, when she had brushed Thessaly's hair at night and called her sweetheart instead of burden. But that was before Thessaly's father left, before the bills stacked up and the bottles appeared, before disappointment calcified into rage and rage became routine. Thessaly could have hated her, should have, probably. But hatred required energy she didn't have, and it required believing that things could be different. Belief was dangerous. Belief led to hope, and hope led to the sharp, cutting pain of having that hope destroyed. So instead, Thessaly felt nothing. Or rather, she felt everything, and had learned to categorize it, file it away, exist alongside it, without letting it touch the part of her that still needed to survive. She was good at surviving. She had learned to anticipate moods, to read the tightness in her mother's jaw, or the particular way she held her cigarette that meant the night would be bad. She had learned which words would escalate and which would deflate. She had learned to make herself useful enough to keep, invisible enough to ignore. But lately, something had been shifting. Her mother's drinking had increased. The long silences had grown longer. The violence had become less about Thessaly doing something wrong and more about her simply existing in the same space. Thessaly knew what this meant. She had seen it in other families in the building, heard it, through thin walls. This was the pattern before someone either left or stopped leaving altogether. She didn't know which one applied to her. On a Thursday night, 3 weeks after she first noticed the black car, Thessaly's mother came home from wherever she went during the day. Thessaly had stopped asking years ago, and the air in the apartment changed immediately. It was in the way the door slammed, the way her mother's footsteps were heavier, less controlled, the way she threw her purse on the table hard enough to knock over the glass of water Thessaly had left there. "You," her mother said, and Thessaly's entire body tensed. "You're the reason. You know that." Thessaly didn't respond. There was no right answer to a question like that. Everything would have been different. Her mother continued, moving closer, and Thessaly could smell the alcohol, thick and sour. "If I hadn't had you, if your father hadn't—" She stopped, her face twisting. "You look just like him. Did you know that? Every time I look at you, I see him, the man who left me with nothing." Thessaly kept her eyes down, her breathing shallow. "Look at me when I'm talking to you." She looked up, saw her mother's face, red and wet with tears and rage, and something that might have been grief if it weren't so twisted. The first blow caught her across the cheek, hard enough to snap her head to the side. The second hit her shoulder. The third, fourth, fifth, she lost count, lost track of where they landed, focused only on staying upright, on not falling, because falling meant being vulnerable to kicks, and that was worse. When it stopped, Thessaly was on the floor, her arms wrapped around her head, her body curled into itself. Her mother stood over her, breathing hard. "Get out of my sight," she said, her voice shaking. "Go to your room, and don't come out, I don't want to see you." Thessaly crawled to her room, closed the door, and sat with her back against it. Her face felt hot and swollen. Her ribs screamed when she breathed. Her shoulder was on fire. She didn't cry. Crying made noise, and noise brought attention, and attention made everything worse. Instead, she sat in the dark and counted her breaths, waiting for her body to stop shaking, for the pain to level out into something manageable. Outside, the black car was there again. She could see it from the small window if she turned her head, but turning her head hurt, so she just listened to the distant sound of its engine and wondered, in a distant, disconnected way, who sat inside and what they were waiting for. Caspian saw her fall, not literally. The curtains were drawn, the windows closed. But he saw her go into the building walking normally and didn't see her come out again. He saw the lights in what he had determined was her apartment flicker on and off erratically. He saw a shadow move across the window, too large to be hers, moving with the agitated energy of someone out of control. He sat in his car, and gripped the steering wheel hard enough to make his knuckles white. Lysander would tell him this wasn't his business. His lawyer would tell him that getting involved in a domestic situation, especially with his profile, his reputation, was legally and strategically foolish. Every rational part of his brain told him to drive away, to let the system handle it, to not risk everything he had built for someone he didn't know. But Caspian had learned long ago that rationality and morality weren't always aligned. He waited 3 hours. The lights stayed on. No one came out. No police arrived, though he wouldn't have expected them to. People in buildings like this didn't call the police. They turned up their televisions and pretended not to hear. At midnight, he drove away. But the next night, he came back, and the night after that, he began to map her routine more carefully. She left the apartment 3 times a week, always for groceries or errands. She walked the same route. She never varied her schedule unless something prevented her, and when she didn't appear, Caspian knew it meant she couldn't walk, or the bruises were too visible, or her mother had locked her in. He learned which apartment was hers, 3rd floor, corner unit facing the street. He learned that her mother worked sporadically at a laundromat 2 miles away, usually 3 days a week, always morning shifts. He learned that the building had a superintendent who spent more time drunk than sober, and that the locks on the front door had been broken for 6 months. He learned these things not through following or interrogating, but through simple observation and the occasional careful question to people who wouldn't remember being asked. Mr. Osgood, the store owner, proved useful without meaning to be. "The girl who comes in for milk," Caspian said one evening, buying cigarettes he would throw away later. "She always seems tired." Osgood shrugged, didn't look up from his newspaper. "Her mother works her hard, I think. Or maybe just life works her hard. Not my business." "How long has she been coming here?" "Years, since she was young. Used to come with her mother back when her mother still smiled." Osgood glanced up, his eyes sharp despite his age. "Why do you ask?" "Curious," Caspian said, meeting his gaze steadily. "She reminds me of someone." Osgood studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. "A lot of people around here remind someone of someone. Usually it's better not to remember." But Caspian couldn't stop remembering. Not the girl herself, he still barely knew her beyond these observations, but what she represented, the particular kind of powerlessness that came from being trapped in a cage made of fear and dependency. The way survival required killing parts of yourself until you weren't sure what was left. He had lived that, had survived it, had promised himself that if he ever had power, he would use it to make sure others didn't have to. It was the only promise he had kept from childhood. 3 weeks into his observation, something changed. Thessaly stopped coming out at all. 4 days passed with no sign of her. The lights in the apartment stayed on at odd hours. He saw her mother come and go, stumbling, carrying bottles. But no Thessaly. On the 5th day, he saw her in the window. Just for a moment. Just long enough to see that she was moving carefully, like someone whose ribs hurt. Long enough to see the bruise that covered half her face, dark purple blooming across her cheek and jaw. Long enough to make a decision. Thessaly knew something was wrong when her mother didn't come home. It was a Tuesday, her mother's usual laundromat shift, and she should have been back by evening. But evening came and went. Midnight passed. Dawn arrived. Thessaly sat in the living room, perched on the edge of the couch, her body tense with a different kind of anticipation than usual. This wasn't the normal dread. This was uncertainty, and uncertainty was almost worse because she didn't know how to prepare for it. At 9 in the morning, there was a knock at the door. Thessaly froze. No one knocked on their door. No one visited. No one cared. "Ms. Kovac?" A man's voice, professional, neutral. "This is Officer Martinez with the city police. We need to speak with you about your mother." Thessaly's mind went blank for a moment, then flooded with possibilities, none of them good. She stood slowly, her body protesting, and moved to the door. She opened it just wide enough to see 2 police officers standing in the hallway, their faces carefully arranged in expressions she couldn't read. "Is she?" Thessaly's voice came out rough, unused. "Is she dead?" "No," Officer Martinez said, his tone softening slightly. "But she's in custody. She was arrested last night for public intoxication and assault of a peace officer. She's being held pending a court appearance." Thessaly didn't feel relief, or worry, or fear. She felt nothing except a strange, distant curiosity about what was supposed to happen next. "We need to ask you some questions," the other officer said, a woman with kind eyes that made Thessaly instinctively distrust her. "May we come in?" Thessaly stepped back and let them enter. They looked around the apartment with the trained observation of people who had seen worse but were still documenting this particular variety of worse. Officer Martinez pulled out a notepad. "How old are you?" 19. "And you live here with your mother?" "Yes." "Anyone else?" "No." The female officer moved closer, her eyes on Thessaly's face, on the bruise that Thessaly hadn't bothered to cover, because there was no point anymore. "Do you feel safe here?" It was a strange question. Thessaly almost laughed. "Safe from what?" "From your mother." Thessaly's face stayed neutral. "She's not here." "That's not what I asked." They went back and forth like this for 20 minutes. The officers asking questions, Thessaly answered with the minimum information required, building a case she knew they would do nothing with. She had heard this script before, had seen social workers come and go when she was younger, had learned that the system was very good at asking questions and very bad at doing anything about the answers. Finally, they left, but not before Officer Martinez handed her a card with a number she would never call and said, "If you need help, reach out." Thessaly closed the door behind them and stood in the silent apartment. Her mother would be released eventually, would come home angry, humiliated, looking for someone to blame, and Thessaly would be here because where else could she go? She had no money, no friends, no relatives who cared whether she lived or died. The only life she knew existed within these walls, and the only survival strategy she had was to endure until her mother's rage burned itself out. But for now, for this moment, the apartment was empty. Thessaly moved through it slowly, carefully, as if walking through a museum. She touched the kitchen counter where she had stood so many times, calculating how to avoid the next blow. She looked at the couch where her mother sat every night, drinking, smoking, broadcasting her disappointment into the universe. She went to her mother's room, a space she was forbidden to enter, and stood in the doorway. The bed was unmade, bottles lined the nightstand, clothes covered the floor. And on the dresser, in a small wooden box that had once held jewelry, Thessaly found $300 in crumpled bills. Her mother's emergency money, hidden, but not well enough. Thessaly stared at it for a long time, her heart beating faster than it had during the entire police visit. $300. Enough to leave. Enough to buy a bus ticket to somewhere, anywhere. She picked up the money, felt its weight in her hands. Then she put it back. Because leaving required believing she deserved to leave, required believing there was somewhere better to go, required hope, and hope was the most dangerous thing of all. She closed the box, left the room, and went back to her own space to wait for whatever happened next. Caspian heard about the arrest through his network, the same network that kept him informed about everything that happened in his territory, from major deals just to minor disturbance. Woman on Maple Street got picked up last night. Lysander mentioned over coffee the next morning. Public drunk, assaulted a cop who tried to calm her down. They're holding her for a couple days probably. Caspian kept his face neutral. Name? Kovac. Marlena Kovac. Lives in that rundown building at the corner, the one that should have been condemned 5 years ago. Caspian nodded slowly, processing. Marlena Kovac, Thessaly's mother, in custody, which meant Thessaly was alone. How long are they holding her? Lysander raised an eyebrow. Why do you care? I don't, Caspian said. Just curious about what's happening in the neighborhood. Since when do you care about petty arrests? Since always. Information is information. Lysander didn't push it, but Caspian could feel the question hanging in the air. His interest in Maple Street had not gone unnoticed. Eventually, he would need to provide an explanation that satisfied his organization's curiosity without revealing too much, but not yet. He spent the day working through legitimate business, the restaurants, the real estate holdings, the investments that made his operation look clean from the outside. His mind, though, kept returning to a girl in an empty apartment, alone, for probably the first time in years, and what that might mean. He could leave her alone, let the system work, let the police follow up, let Thessaly make her own choices. Or he could do what he did best, take action based on information and planning. By evening, he had made a decision. The knock came at 7 p.m. Thessaly was in the kitchen, eating cereal from a cup, because all the bowls were dirty, and she didn't have the energy to wash them when she heard it. 3 firm knocks, evenly spaced, not aggressive but not tentative. She set down the cup and moved to the door, her heart rate picking up. The police again, maybe, or a social worker, or her mother, somehow released early and locked out. She looked through the peephole and saw a man, not a police officer, not anyone she recognized. He was tall, dark-haired, wearing a suit that looked expensive even through the distorted glass. He stood with perfect posture, hands visible, clearly aware of the peephole and positioning himself so she could see he wasn't a threat. Thessaly didn't open the door. Who is it? My name is Caspian Nero. His voice was deep, calm, the kind of voice that didn't need to be raised to be heard. I need to speak with you. It's important. I don't know you. I know, but I know you. Or, rather, I've seen you. I've been watching your building. Thessaly's blood went cold. I'm calling the police. The police were already here this morning. They left. And they'll come back probably tomorrow, and they'll ask you more questions you won't answer honestly because you've learned that honesty doesn't help. Then they'll leave again, and eventually your mother will come home. Thessaly said nothing, her hand on the doorknob, her mind racing. I'm not here to hurt you, Caspian continued. I'm here to offer you a choice, but I need you to open the door so we can have this conversation like adults, not through 2 inches of wood. How do I know you're not? She didn't finish the sentence. Didn't need to. You don't. You have no reason to trust me. But I'm asking you to open the door anyway, because what I have to say, you need to hear. Thessaly stood frozen for a long moment, every survival instinct she had screaming at her not to open the door for a strange man, who admitted he had been watching her. But there was something in his voice, a steadiness, a lack of performance, that didn't match the pattern of men who meant harm. Those men wheedled, they charmed, they made promises. This man stated facts and waited. Slowly, Thessaly unlocked the door and opened it 6 inches, keeping the chain engaged. Through the gap, she could see him clearly now. He was younger than she expected from the voice, maybe mid-30s, with sharp features and eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. Eyes that, when they landed on her face, on the bruise that covered her cheek and jaw, went very still. My name is Caspian Nero, he said again, speaking to her directly now. I run certain businesses in this area. I'm not a good man by most definitions, but I have rules, lines I don't cross. And one of those lines is this: I don't allow people in my territory to be systematically destroyed. Thessaly's throat was dry. What do you want? I want to offer you a way out. Your mother is going to be released tomorrow afternoon. When she comes home, she's going to be angry, humiliated, and looking for someone to blame for her arrest and her night in a cell. That someone will be you. Thessaly knew this, had known it since the police left. The knowledge sat in her stomach like a stone. I can remove you from this situation, Caspian said. Permanently. I have resources, properties, places where you would be safe. I'm offering you that safety, no strings attached, no debt owed. Just a chance to not be here when she comes back. It was too much, too strange. Men didn't offer things without wanting something in return. Thessaly's hands trembled slightly, but she kept her voice steady. Why? Because I can, and because I've seen what happens when people stay in situations like this. They don't survive. Not the parts of them that matter. You don't know me. No, but I recognize you. He paused. I recognize the way you walk. The way you make yourself small. The way you calculate every movement to avoid pain. I recognize it because I used to walk the same way. Thessaly stared at him, searching for the lie, the manipulation, the trap. But his face was just a face. Serious and still, telling her something that might be truth or might be a different kind of lie, the kind wrapped in genuine-sounding confession. I need time to think, she said finally. You have until tomorrow afternoon. After that, the choice becomes harder. If you decide you want out, be ready at noon. I'll be parked outside. One bag. Whatever matters to you. Leave everything else. And if I say no, then I drive away, and you never see me again. He reached into his jacket. Thessaly flinched, couldn't help it, and pulled out a card, plain white with just a phone number printed in black. He slid it through the gap in the door. If you need me before noon, call that number. Someone will answer and they'll find me. Thessaly took the card, her fingers brushing against his briefly. His hand was warm, steady. I'm not asking you to trust me, Caspian said, stepping back. I'm asking you to trust yourself, to believe that you deserve better than this, and then to make a choice based on that belief. He turned and walked down the hallway, his footsteps even and unhurried. Thessaly stood in the doorway, the card in her hand, and watched him go until he disappeared down the stairs. Then she closed the door, engaged all the locks, and slid down to sit on the floor with her back against it. Her mind was chaos. Her body was exhausted. But somewhere, buried deep beneath years of carefully constructed numbness, something that might have been hope stirred, and that terrified her more than anything. Thessaly didn't sleep that night. She sat on her mattress, the card in her hand, turning it over and over, no name on it, just a number, 10 digits that represented either salvation or a different kind of trap. Her mind ran through scenarios, possibilities, risks. What if he was lying? What if this was trafficking or something worse? What if she went with him and ended up in a situation she couldn't escape from, where her current life would look like freedom in comparison? But then, what did escape even look like? What did freedom mean to someone who had never had it? She thought about the money in her mother's room. $300. Enough to run, but not enough to survive. She had no ID, no job history, no references. She was 19 years old and had never had a bank account, never signed a lease, never done any of the things that made a person legally real in the world. Running alone meant sleeping in shelters, if they had room, meant being vulnerable on streets that were dangerous for girls with nowhere to go, meant possibly ending up worse off than she was now. At least here, she knew the rules, knew the patterns, knew how to survive. But did she want to survive, or did she want to live? And were those two things the same? The question exhausted her. She lay down, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling until dawn turned the room gray. At 10 a.m., she made a decision. She pulled out the one bag she owned, a worn backpack she had used for school years ago, before her mother decided education was a waste of time. She packed methodically, practically, 2 changes of clothes, underwear, socks, a toothbrush. A small photo of her father she had hidden under her mattress, the only picture she had of him before he left. That was it. The sum total of her life fit in a backpack, with room to spare. She went to her mother's room one more time, stood in front of the wooden box, and looked at the money. $300. Her mother's emergency fund. Thessaly took $200 and left $100. Not out of kindness, but out of strategy. If all the money disappeared, her mother would tear the city apart looking for her. But if some remained, she might just assume she had drunk more than she remembered, or that Thessaly had taken some for groceries. It might buy time. She folded the bills and tucked them into her bra, the safest place she could think of. At 11:30, she wrote a note. Not because she wanted to, but because not leaving one would be suspicious. Had to go. Don't look for me. 4 words. No signature. She left it on the kitchen table and walked out of the apartment, closing the door behind her for the last time. The hallway was empty. The building was quiet. She walked down the 3 flights of stairs slowly, each step feeling heavy and light at the same time. Outside, the November air was cold, and the black car was already there, engine running, exhaust visible in the chill. Thessaly stood on the sidewalk, the backpack over one shoulder, and looked at it. This was the moment, the choice. She could walk toward the car, or she could walk away. Nobody was forcing her. The man, Caspian, had said he would leave if she said no. She could still go back upstairs. Could tear up the note. Could put the money back. Could wait for her mother to come home and take whatever came next. The car's passenger window rolled down, and Caspian's face appeared. He didn't smile, didn't beckon, just looked at her steadily, waiting. Thessaly took a breath that hurt her ribs, adjusted the backpack, and walked forward. The car was warm inside, clean. It smelled like leather, and something else, something expensive that Thessaly didn't have words for. She sat in the passenger seat, the backpack on her lap, her hands gripping it tight. Caspian didn't speak immediately. He rolled the window back up, checked his mirrors, and pulled away from the curb smoothly. They drove in silence for 10 minutes before Thessaly found her voice. "Where are we going?" "Safe house. About 40 minutes from here. It's clean, secure, and no one will look for you there." "Why are you doing this?" Thessaly asked, not because she expected a real answer, but because the silence was somehow worse than talking. Caspian kept his eyes on the road. "I told you, I have rules. That's not a reason. It's the only reason I'm going to give." Thessaly looked out the window, watching the familiar streets give way to less familiar ones. She was leaving the only neighborhood she had ever known, getting into a car with a man who claimed to be in the mafia, trusting him because... Why? Because he had nice eyes, because his voice sounded steady. "You could be taking me anywhere," she said quietly. "I could, but I'm not." "How do I know that?" Caspian glanced at her briefly. "You don't. But at some point, you had to choose between certain harm and possible harm. You chose possible. That's not weakness. That's survival instinct. Or stupidity. Time will tell." They fell silent again. Thessaly's hands were shaking now that the adrenaline was fading. The reality of what she had done, leaving, taking money, going with a stranger, was starting to settle in, and with it came fear that made her throat tight. "I need you to understand something," Caspian said after another few minutes. "Where we're going, there are rules. You follow them, you'll be safe. You break them, you'll be asked to leave. Do you understand?" "What kind of rules?" "Don't contact anyone from your old life. Don't tell anyone where you are. Don't leave the property without permission. These rules aren't about controlling you. They're about keeping you alive. Your mother will look for you. When she does, she can't find you. That means complete separation." Thessaly's stomach twisted. "For how long?" "Until we make permanent arrangements. A week, maybe 2. Long enough to get you documentation, money, a plan for what comes next." "I don't have documentation. I don't have anything." "I know. That's why we need time." Thessaly absorbed this. He was talking about creating a new identity, essentially. Making her legally real, in ways her mother had never bothered to do. It should have felt wrong, illegal, dangerous. Instead, it felt like possibility. They drove into a neighborhood Thessaly had never seen before. Trees lining the streets, houses with yards, everything clean and maintained. It looked like a different world, one where people lived in safety she had only seen on television. Caspian pulled into the driveway of a modest 2-story house. Plain white siding, black shutters, nothing fancy but solid, real. "This is it," he said, cutting the engine. Thessaly looked at the house, then at Caspian. "You own this?" "I own several properties. This one is rarely used. It's clean, furnished, and stocked with everything you'll need for a few weeks." He got out of the car, and after a moment Thessaly followed. Her legs felt weak, unsteady. Everything was happening too fast, and yet somehow not fast enough. Caspian unlocked the front door and stepped inside, waiting for her to follow. Thessaly crossed the threshold and found herself in a living room that looked normal. Couch, television, coffee table, curtains drawn, everything clean and impersonal, like a hotel room. "Kitchen is through there," Caspian said, pointing. "Bedrooms upstairs. Bathroom on each floor. You can take whichever room you want. There's food in the refrigerator and pantry, basic supplies in the bathrooms, clothes in various sizes in the closets. Take whatever fits." Thessaly stood in the middle of the room, still holding her backpack, trying to process all of this. "I'll have someone check on you every few days," Caspian continued. "Her name is Soledad. She works for me, and she's safe. She'll bring anything you need. Otherwise, you're alone here. Television works. There's books, no computer, no phone. That's for your safety, not punishment. How do I contact you if something goes wrong? Soledad will have a way to reach me. For now, nothing should go wrong if you follow the rules. Thessaly nodded slowly. None of this felt real. She felt like she was watching herself from outside her body, watching a girl who looked like her stand in a stranger's house and accept that this was her life now. I'll leave you to settle in, Caspian said, moving toward the door. Soledad will come tomorrow. Wait, Thessaly said, the word coming out before she could stop it. He turned. Why did you notice me? She asked. Out of everyone. Why me? Caspian was quiet for a moment, and Thessaly saw something shift in his expression, something that might have been memory or regret. Because you reminded me of someone I couldn't save, he said finally, and I decided I was done living with that kind of regret. Then he left, closing the door behind him with a soft click. Thessaly stood alone in the silent house, her backpack still in her hands, and felt the full weight of her choice settle over her. She had left, she was here, she was safe, and she had no idea what to do with any of it. Caspian sat in his car for a full minute before starting the engine. He had done it, had intervened, had removed her from the situation. Now she was safe, at least physically, and the rest would unfold according to the plan he had carefully constructed. But a part of him, the part that still remembered being young and powerless and trapped, knew that physical safety was only the first step. The harder part was what came next. Teaching someone who had survived by making themselves small how to exist in a space where they were allowed to be whole. He pulled out his phone and called Lysander. It's done, he said when Lysander answered. What's done? The situation on Maple Street. It's handled. There was a pause. Handled how? The girl is safe. The mother won't find her. That's all you need to know. Boss, that's all you need to know. Caspian repeated, his voice hardening slightly. If anyone asks about me in that building, you know nothing. If the mother comes looking, you know nothing. This doesn't exist. Understood, Lysander said, though his tone suggested he had many questions he was smart enough not to ask. Caspian ended the call and started driving. He had business to attend to, territory to manage, a dozen things that required his attention, but his mind kept returning to a girl with bruises shaped like fingerprints, and eyes that had learned not to hope. He had given her safety. Now she had to figure out what to do with it. And that, he knew from experience, was the hardest part of all. The first night in the safe house, Thessaly didn't sleep. Not because she was uncomfortable. The bed was softer than anything she had ever slept on, the room warm and quiet, but because comfort was unfamiliar, and unfamiliar things required vigilance. She lay on top of the covers, fully dressed, her backpack within arm's reach, and listened to the silence. No television droning, no footsteps in the hallway, no coughs or curses or bottles being opened. Just silence. Vast and complete, and somehow more terrifying than noise. Her body wouldn't relax, kept expecting the door to slam open, for her mother to appear, for this to be revealed as a dream or a trick. Every creak of the house settling, every distant sound of a car passing, made her flinch. By dawn, she was exhausted but still awake, her eyes burning, her body aching with a different kind of pain than she was used to, the pain of not knowing what came next. She got up and explored the house carefully, methodically, the way she had learned to assess spaces for safety. The downstairs was as Caspian had described: living room, kitchen, bathroom, everything clean and impersonal. The refrigerator was indeed stocked. Bread, eggs, milk, cheese, vegetables, meat. More food than she had seen in one place in years. Upstairs there were 3 bedrooms, one clearly the master, larger with an attached bathroom, the other 2 smaller, simpler. Thessaly chose the smallest, the one farthest from the stairs. It had a window overlooking the backyard, a closet with clothes hanging neatly on hangers in various sizes, and a dresser with folded items in the drawers. She tried on a few pieces, jeans that fit better than her own, a sweater that was clean and soft. Looking at herself in the bathroom mirror, wearing clothes that weren't stained or torn, she almost didn't recognize the person looking back. The bruise on her face was still vivid. Purple and yellow and green, impossible to hide. Her eyes looked too large, too dark, ringed with exhaustion. Her hair needed washing. She looked like exactly what she was, a girl who had been beaten and was now hiding. She spent the day moving through the house cautiously, touching things lightly, as if they might disappear. She made herself eat, though food felt strange in her stomach, too rich after years of cheap cereal and whatever her mother left behind. By evening, the silence started to feel less threatening and more empty. She turned on the television, flipped through channels, found nothing that held her attention. The books on the shelves were random: thrillers, romances, self-help books with titles like Breaking Free and Starting Over that felt both patronizing and painful. She settled on a cooking show, watched people make elaborate meals in bright kitchens, and tried to imagine a life where food was something joyful instead of just fuel. When darkness fell, she locked every door, checked every window, and went back to her chosen bedroom. This time she got under the covers, closed her eyes, tried to sleep, and failed again. Soledad arrived the next afternoon. Thessaly heard the car pull up, saw a woman in her 50s get out carrying grocery bags, and felt her entire body tense. She watched through the window as Soledad walked to the front door and knocked, not pounding, just 3 firm knocks, the same rhythm Caspian had used. "Thessaly," Soledad called, through the door. "My name is Soledad. Caspian sent me. I'm going to leave groceries on the porch and then step back. You can open the door when you're ready." Thessaly watched her do exactly that. Set down the bags, step back 10 feet, and wait with her hands visible. Slowly, Thessaly unlocked the door, opened it, and looked at the woman. Soledad was stocky, practical-looking, with gray-streaked dark hair pulled back, and eyes that seemed kind, but not in the performative way that made Thessaly distrust kindness. "Hello," Soledad said, not moving closer. "I'm not going to come in unless you want me to. I'm just here to bring food and see if you need anything." Thessaly looked at the bags on the porch. "Thank you. How are you settling in?" It was such a normal question, so ordinary. Thessaly didn't know how to answer it. "It's fine," she said finally. Soledad nodded as if this answer meant something. "Caspian said you might need some things. Toiletries maybe. Personal items. I brought some basics, but if there's anything specific, you can tell me." "I don't have a list." "That's okay. Think about it. I'll come back in 3 days." Soledad pulled a small notepad from her pocket and a pen. "My number is on here. If something goes wrong, if you feel unsafe, if you need help, anything, you call this number. Someone will answer. They'll find me or Caspian. Understand?" Thessaly took the notepad, looked at the number written in neat handwriting. "The house phone works for outgoing calls," Soledad continued. "But it can't receive incoming calls. That's for security. And I know Caspian told you not to contact anyone from before, but I'm telling you again because it's important. If your mother finds you, she will hurt you, and not just physically. She'll drag you back into a life that will kill you slowly. You understand that?" Thessaly nodded. She understood, had known it even before leaving. Her mother's rage at being abandoned would be limitless. "Good, then we're clear." Soledad smiled slightly. "I brought some real coffee. The good kind. It's in the bags. And some pastries from a bakery downtown. You look like you could use something sweet." "I don't like charity," Thessaly said, the words coming out harder than she meant them to. "It's not charity, it's payment." "For what?" "For having the courage to leave. That takes more strength than most people have." Soledad's expression softened. "I know you don't trust this yet. Don't trust me. Don't trust Caspian. Don't trust any of it. That's smart. But trust is earned through consistency. I'll show up when I say I will. I'll bring what I promise. And eventually maybe you'll believe that not everyone is waiting to hurt you." She turned to leave, then paused. "One more thing. There's a journal in one of the desk drawers upstairs. Blue cover. You don't have to use it, but sometimes writing things down helps when thinking them is too loud." Thessaly watched her get back in her car and drive away. Then she collected the bags from the porch, brought them inside, and locked the door again. Among the groceries and toiletries, she found the coffee and pastries. Also, fresh vegetables, real butter, eggs, cheese. Things her mother had never bought because they cost more than the cheapest options. She made coffee, strong, black, and tried a pastry that tasted like honey and almonds and something else she couldn't identify. It was the best thing she had ever eaten, and that made her want to cry for reasons she didn't fully understand. That night, she found the journal Soledad had mentioned. Blue cover, blank pages, a pen tucked into the spiral binding. She opened it to the first page and stared at the emptiness. She had never been good with words, had never kept a diary, or written down thoughts. But the silence of the house was pressing on her, and Soledad was right. Thinking was too loud. She picked up the pen and wrote, Day 2. I don't know what I'm doing. Here. I don't know if I made the right choice. I don't know how to be safe because I don't know what safe feels like. My face still hurts. My ribs still hurt. But it's a different kind of hurt because no one is making it worse. I'm scared all the time. But it's a different kind of scared. I don't know if that's better or worse. She closed the journal, put it back in the drawer, and went to bed. This time she slept for 3 hours before waking from a dream where her mother was breaking down the door. It was progress, even if it didn't feel like it. The days began to blur into a pattern. Wake up, tense and vigilant. Shower in water that was always hot. Eat food that was always available. Move through the house, touching things, learning the space. Watch television or read or sit in silence. Wait for Soledad's visits every 3 days. Soledad always came when she said she would. Always brought groceries and whatever Thessaly had mentioned needing, which wasn't much because Thessaly wasn't used to needing things. On the 4th visit, Soledad brought clothes that actually fit, having assessed Thessaly's size during previous visits. Jeans, shirts, a warm jacket for when Thessaly could eventually leave the house. When do I get to leave? Thessaly asked as they stood in the kitchen, Soledad unpacking bags. When Caspian says it's safe, when we're sure your mother isn't actively looking, when you have documentation and a plan. How long will that take? A few more weeks, probably. Thessaly's hands clenched. A few more weeks of being locked in a house, even a nice house, even a safe house. It was still a cage, just a prettier one, Soledad noticed. I know it's hard, but freedom with preparation is better than freedom with nothing. You run too soon, you'll end up on the streets or worse. You wait, you'll have options. I don't like waiting. No one does, but you've survived worse than waiting. It was true, and Thessaly hated that it was true. On the 5th visit, Soledad brought a laptop. Caspian said you need education, Soledad explained, setting it on the kitchen table. High school diploma, at least. He's arranged for online courses. You'll work through them at your own pace. When you finish, you'll have credentials that are real and legal. Thessaly stared at the laptop. I haven't been to school in years. That doesn't mean you're not smart. It just means you're behind. But behind isn't permanent. Thessaly opened the laptop, found it already set up with her name, her real name, which somehow made this all more real. The courses were basic: math, English, history, science. Things she should have learned years ago if her mother hadn't pulled her out of school to save money and keep her at home. She started that evening working through English composition and was surprised to find it didn't feel impossible. Hard, yes, frustrating, but not impossible. It gave her something to do besides wait, something to focus on besides fear. 2 weeks into her stay at the safe house, Thessaly had settled into a routine that almost felt normal. Wake at dawn, shower, eat breakfast, work on courses for 3 hours, make lunch, read or watch television, work on courses for another 2 hours, make dinner, write in the journal, sleep. The bruises on her face had faded to yellow-green shadows. Her ribs still hurt when she breathed too deep, but less than before. Her body was healing slowly, without new injuries being added. Her mind was a different matter. At night, she still dreamed of her mother, of being dragged back to the apartment, of the door slamming and the beatings starting again. She would wake up gasping, disoriented, convinced she heard footsteps in the hallway. But the hallway was always empty. The house was always quiet. And eventually, her heart would slow and she would remember where she was, safe. For now, Soledad noticed the exhaustion during her visits. You're not sleeping, she said one afternoon, studying Thessaly's face. I sleep enough. Sleeping and sleeping well aren't the same thing. Soledad paused. Have you thought about talking to someone? A therapist? Thessaly's automatic response was defensive. I don't need therapy. Everyone who's been through what you've been through needs therapy. That's not weakness, that's acknowledging reality. I don't want to talk about it. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to. But having someone listen when you're ready might help. Thessaly didn't respond. and Soledad didn't push. That was one thing Thessaly appreciated about her. She made suggestions but didn't demand. Offered help but didn't force it. Caspian wants to meet with you, Soledad said after a pause. Thessaly's head snapped up. Why? To discuss next steps. Your documentation is almost ready. He wants to talk about what happens after you leave here. Fear spiked through Thessaly's chest. When? Tomorrow, afternoon. I'll drive you to his office. It's safe. Private location. No one will see you. But he needs to go over plans with you. Make sure you understand your options. Thessaly's hands trembled slightly. She hadn't seen Caspian since he dropped her off. Hadn't spoken to him. He had been a presence in the background, the person funding this safety, arranging her future, but not a real person. Now he would be real again, and she would have to face him and make decisions about a life she still barely believed she deserved. Okay, she said quietly. Tomorrow. Soledad nodded. I'll pick you up at 2. Wear the nice clothes I brought last week. This is business. The next afternoon, Thessaly dressed carefully in the dark jeans and gray sweater Soledad had specified. She looked at herself in the mirror and saw someone who almost looked normal. Clean, fed, rested enough to pass. The bruises were gone. Her hair was brushed. She looked like a regular 19-year-old instead of someone who had been beaten daily for years. It felt like a disguise. Soledad arrived exactly at 2, and Thessaly got into the car with her stomach in knots. They drove for 30 minutes deeper into the city until they reached a neighborhood of office buildings and upscale restaurants. Soledad pulled into a parking garage beneath a tall building and parked in a reserved spot. 4th floor, she said, Suite 412. Caspian is expecting you. Thessaly got out of the car, her legs unsteady. Soledad walked with her to the elevator, pressed the button for the 4th floor, and gave her an encouraging nod as the doors closed. The ride up felt too fast. The hallway was empty, carpeted, lined with doors bearing numbers and business names. Suite 412 had a plain brass plate that said only Nero Enterprises. Thessaly knocked. Come in. Caspian's voice called from inside. She opened the door and found herself in a small reception area, a desk currently unoccupied, and a sitting area with leather chairs. Beyond that, an open door leading to an office. Caspian stood when she entered, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. Thessaly, thank you for coming. She sat, her back straight, her hands in her lap. He sat too, and for a moment they just looked at each other, the first time since the car ride 2 weeks ago. He looked the same, controlled, professional, unreadable. But his eyes, when they met hers, held something that might have been relief. You're healing well, he said, not a question. Yes. Soledad says you're working on your GED courses. Yes. Good. He pulled a folder from his desk and slid it across to her. These are your documents. Birth certificate, social security card, state ID, all legitimate, all legal. Your name, your birth date, everything accurate. You're real now, officially. Thessaly opened the folder with shaking hands and looked at the cards and papers bearing her name. These simple pieces of paper that made her exist in the eyes of the law. How? You don't need to know how. Just know that they're real, and they'll stand up to any check. With these, you can get a job, open a bank account, rent an apartment, live a normal life. Thessaly stared at the documents. What do I owe you for this? Nothing. That's not how the world works. Everything costs something. Caspian leaned back in his chair. You're right. Everything does cost something. What this cost me was money and time, both of which I have enough of. What it cost you was leaving everything you knew, even if what you knew was killing you. We're even. It doesn't feel even. It's not about feelings. It's about facts. You needed help. I provided it. Now we move forward. He pulled out another folder, thicker this time. These are your options. I've arranged 3 possibilities for you, and you get to choose which one you want. He opened the folder and spread out papers in front of her. Option 1. I have a friend who runs a community college 2 hours upstate. He's agreed to admit you for the spring semester, full scholarship, with campus housing. You finish your GED in the next month. You start school in January. You'll have a place to live, an education, and distance from here. Thessaly's throat tightened. College. You're smart enough, you're motivated enough, why not? I've never… She stopped. I don't know if I can do that. You don't have to decide now. That's option 1. Option 2, I have a property manager who needs an assistant. She'll train you, pay you a real salary, provide an apartment as part of the compensation. You'll learn a trade, build a resume, have independence. It's stable, practical work. And option 3? Option 3 is you take time. I have another safe property, this one with a job placement program attached. You spend 6 months learning skills, computer work, office management, whatever interests you. At the end, they help you find employment and housing. It's slower, but it builds a foundation. Thessaly looked at the papers, at the 3 paths laid out in neat folders, and felt overwhelmed. These were real choices, real possibilities, things she had never imagined for herself. Why are you doing this? She asked again, the question she kept asking because she still didn't understand. Caspian was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, When I was 15, I watched my mother get beaten by my father every night for 3 years. I was too young, too powerless to stop it. When I finally got old enough, strong enough, I killed him. Thessaly's breath caught. I'm not telling you this to shock you or to bond over trauma. I'm telling you so you understand. I know what it looks like when someone is being systematically destroyed. I know what it costs to survive it. And I decided a long time ago that if I ever had power, I would use it to make sure other people didn't have to make the choice I made. He met her eyes steadily. You deserve better than what you had. Now you have the chance to build it. These options aren't charity. They're what should have been available to you all along. Take them, or don't, but know that you earned them just by surviving. Thessaly's hands were shaking. She looked down at the folders, at the future spread out in documents and possibilities. What happens if I fail? She asked quietly. You won't. But if I do, then you try again. That's what people with options get to do. They get to fail and try again. That's what safety means. The freedom to fail without it destroying you. Thessaly picked up the folder for option 1, the college. Read through the details. A real education, a real degree, a real chance to be someone other than the girl who got beaten. Can I think about it? You have 2 weeks. Then Soledad will help you move to whichever option you choose. But Thessaly… He waited until she looked up at him. Whatever you choose, you're not alone in it. Soledad will check on you. I'll make sure you have what you need. You're not being abandoned into this. You're being supported through it. Thessaly nodded, not trusting her voice. One more thing, Caspian said, his voice gentler. Your mother has stopped looking for you. Thessaly's head snapped up. What? She filed a missing persons report the day after you left. Police came, asked questions, did a minimal investigation. Then she withdrew the report, told them you were an adult and had the right to leave. Why would she? Because I made it clear that if she continued to look, if she tried to find you, there would be consequences. She understood. Thessaly's stomach twisted. What kind of consequences? The kind I don't need to detail. Just know that she won't find you, she won't look. You're free of her. Free. The word didn't feel real. Freedom was a concept, not an experience. Thessaly had no idea what it actually felt like, but sitting in this office, looking at folders full of futures, holding documents that made her real, maybe this was the beginning of learning. Thank you, she said, the words feeling inadequate. Caspian shook his head slightly. Don't thank me. Just build something worth the cost of leaving. Thessaly chose the college. It wasn't an easy decision. The property management job was safer, more practical, a clear path to stability. The 6-month program was gentler, less demanding, allowed for more time to heal. But something in her responded to the college option with a feeling she barely recognized. Hope. She had never been allowed to imagine herself as educated, as someone who could sit in classrooms and learn things that mattered, as someone with a degree and a future that wasn't just survival. So she chose it, even though it terrified her. Soledad helped her prepare over the next 2 weeks. They went shopping for college supplies, notebooks, pens, a laptop that was nicer than the one at the safe house. They bought clothes that looked like what college students wore, not too nice, not too worn. They packed everything carefully into suitcases that weren't falling apart. You'll do well, Soledad said on the drive up to the campus. You're smarter than you think you are. I'm scared, Thessaly admitted. Good. Fear means you care. It's the people who aren't scared who usually fail. The campus was small, nestled in a town that felt impossibly far from the city. Trees everywhere, old brick buildings, students walking between classes looking normal, unburdened, like education was something they deserved. Thessaly's dorm room was tiny, but private. A single because Caspian had arranged it that way. A bed, a desk, a window overlooking a quad, where students threw frisbees and studied on blankets. Soledad helped her unpack, showed her where everything was, the dining hall, the library, the academic buildings. Then, standing in the doorway ready to leave, she pulled Thessaly into a brief hug that Thessaly didn't know how to return. You call me if you need anything, Soledad said. Anything at all. I'm 2 hours away. I can be here. Okay? I mean it, Thessaly. You're not alone. Then she left, and Thessaly was alone in a dorm room at a college she still couldn't quite believe she was attending. The first semester was brutal, not because the work was impossible, but because Thessaly was so far behind. Math, that other students had learned in high school, felt like a foreign language. English composition assignments, assumed knowledge of books she had never read. History courses, referenced events she had only vaguely heard of. She spent nights in the library, working until her eyes burned, until the words blurred together. She went to every office hour, asked every question, took every opportunity for extra credit. Her professors noticed. Some pitied her. Others respected her effort. One, Dr. Tanaka, who taught English, called her into his office after midterms. You're working harder than any student I've had in 5 years, he said. But you're drowning. Why? Thessaly didn't know how to explain. I'm behind. I can see that. But behind isn't the same as incapable. You understand concepts quickly, once someone explains them. You write with clarity when you understand the assignment. You're not struggling because you're not smart. You're struggling because you're trying to fill 10 years of gaps in 6 months. So I should quit? Absolutely not. But you should get help, tutoring, study groups. Stop trying to do this alone. Thessaly had spent her entire life doing everything alone. The idea of asking for help, of admitting she needed it, felt like weakness. But Dr. Tanaka assigned her a tutor anyway, a senior named Sable who was patient and practical and didn't ask questions about why Thessaly didn't know things other freshmen knew. Slowly, impossibly, Thessaly began to catch up. She didn't make friends easily. The world, other students her age seemed impossibly young, concerned with parties and dating and drama that Thessaly couldn't relate to. They complained about parents who called too much, about having to come home for holidays, about curfews and rules. Thessaly, who had escaped a mother who beat her, who lived in a dorm room paid for by a mafia boss, who had documentation that was real but obtained through means she didn't ask about. Thessaly had nothing to contribute to these conversations, so she stayed quiet, polite but distant, present but not participating. There was one person who broke through, though, a girl named Reverie who lived 2 doors down and who seemed entirely unbothered by Thessaly's silence. Reverie would knock on her door and invite herself in, sprawling on Thessaly's bed while Thessaly worked at her desk, talking about everything and nothing. She never asked why Thessaly didn't talk about her family, never pushed for details Thessaly didn't offer. You're mysterious, Reverie said one night, eating chips while Thessaly studied. I like mysterious. I'm not mysterious, I'm boring. Boring people don't look like they're solving the world's problems every time they think. You always look like you're calculating something. Because she was. Thessaly was always calculating. The safest way to move through spaces, the best responses to questions, the quickest exit from any room. Survival habits didn't disappear just because the danger had. My childhood was complicated, Thessaly said finally. I don't like talking about it. That's cool. Mine was too. Different reasons. We can just be friends who don't talk about the past, deal? Deal. And somehow that worked. Reverie became Thessaly's first real friend, someone who studied with her, ate meals with her, walked across campus with her between classes, someone who didn't need to know everything to care. Soledad called every week. How are classes? Hard, but manageable. Are you eating? Yes. Sleeping? Enough. The conversations were brief but regular, a touch point that reminded Thessaly she was connected to something beyond the campus, that she hadn't been completely cut adrift. Caspian never called, but Soledad mentioned him. "He asks about you," Soledad said one day. "Wants to know how you're doing." "Why doesn't he ask me himself?" "Because he doesn't want you to feel obligated. He did what he did because it was right, not to create debt. You owe him nothing, including updates." But Thessaly found herself wanting to update him anyway, wanting to tell him about the B she got on her English paper, the math test she didn't fail, the slow, painful progress she was making. She didn't, though. Kept that distance between them because it felt safer than acknowledging how much his intervention had changed everything. The first semester ended, and Thessaly stayed on campus over winter break. Most students went home, but Thessaly had no home to return to, and the college allowed students in her situation to remain in the dorms. She spent the quiet weeks working ahead on next semester's reading, picking up shifts at the campus coffee shop for extra money, and walking through the empty campus in the cold. On Christmas Eve, a package arrived for her. Inside was a note from Soledad. "Caspian says you're doing well. He's proud of you, even if he won't say it. We both are. S." There was also a gift card to the campus bookstore, enough to buy all her textbooks for spring semester, without worrying about cost. Thessaly sat in her quiet dorm room, holding the card and the note, and felt something crack open in her chest. Not gratitude exactly. Something bigger than that. The recognition that people she barely knew, people who had no obligation to care, had decided she was worth caring about anyway. She wrote a letter that night, not an email, but an actual handwritten letter, because it felt more real. "Dear Caspian, I don't know how to thank you for what you've done. Every time I try to put it into words, it sounds inadequate. You gave me a chance I didn't know existed. You believed I deserved better when I didn't believe it myself. I'm at college now. I'm learning. I'm building something. It's hard, and I'm scared most of the time, but I'm doing it. I don't know if I'll ever be able to pay you back. But I can promise you this. I won't waste it. I won't let what you did for me be for nothing. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible." To Sally. She mailed it the next day and tried not to think about whether he would respond. He didn't, but Soledad called a week later. "He got your letter," she said. "He doesn't do emotions well, but I could tell it mattered. I meant every word. I know you did. That's why it mattered." Spring semester was easier than fall. Thessaly had found her rhythm, learned how to study, built relationships with professors who were willing to help. Her grades improved. Her confidence, fragile and new, began to solidify. She declared a major, social work. Dr. Tanaka asked her why during a routine advising session. "Because I know what it's like to need help and not know how to ask for it," Thessaly said. "I want to be the person who makes it easier for others." He nodded slowly. "That's good motivation, but remember, you can't save everyone, and trying to will destroy you." "I know, but I can try to help some. That's better than helping none." The end of freshman year came faster than Thessaly expected. She had survived 2 semesters, had earned credits that were real, grades that proved she belonged here, had made a friend, built routines, learned to exist in a space where she wasn't constantly afraid. Summer came, and with it, another decision. Where to go, what to do, Soledad called before Thessaly had to ask. "Caspian has a summer option for you, if you want it. Internship at a youth services nonprofit. Pays minimum wage, includes housing, builds your resume for social work. Where? Same town as the college. You wouldn't have to leave." Thessaly thought about going back to the city, to the safe house, to waiting. Or she could stay here, keep building, keep moving forward. "I'll take it," she said. "Good, Caspian thought you would." The summer internship was transformative. Thessaly worked with kids who reminded her of herself, quiet, guarded, surviving rather than living. She learned how to talk to them without demanding trust, how to offer help without making them feel weak, how to create safety without creating dependency. She learned that trauma left marks that didn't always show, that healing wasn't linear, that sometimes survival was the best anyone could manage, and that was enough. And she learned, slowly, that she was good at this work, that her experience, the years of calculating pain, of reading moods, of making herself small, gave her insight others didn't have. She could see the signs, could recognize the patterns, could intervene before things got worse, because she knew exactly what worse looked like. By the end of summer, her supervisor offered her a part-time position during the school year. "You have a gift for this," she said. "Don't waste it." Thessaly didn't plan to. Sophomore year began with Thessaly feeling something she had never felt before: stability. She had a routine, had work she cared about, had friends, not many, but real ones, had professors who knew her name and saw her potential. She still had nightmares sometimes, still flinched at sudden movements, still calculated exits, and assessed danger even when there was none. But she also had moments, quiet, unexpected moments, where she realized she wasn't afraid, where she walked across campus and felt like she belonged, where she sat in class and believed she deserved to be there, where she looked in the mirror and recognized the person looking back. 2 years after, leaving her mother's apartment, Thessaly stood in the office of the nonprofit where she had interned, now working there part-time while finishing her degree. A young girl, 14, bruised, terrified, sat across from her, and Thessaly saw herself in a way that no longer hurt quite so much. "You're safe here," Thessaly said quietly. "I know you don't believe that yet, but it's true. And I know that because I was exactly where you are, and I survived, and now I'm here." The girl looked at her with eyes that recognized the truth of shared experience. "What if I can't do it?" the girl whispered. "You can, because you already are. You came here. You asked for help. That's the hardest part. Everything after is just steps." Thessaly gave her the resources, the phone numbers, the plans for safety, and when the girl left, Thessaly sat at her desk and thought about the distance between who she had been and who she was becoming. 2 years. 2 years of sleeping without fear most nights. 2 years of building something instead of just surviving. 2 years of learning that safety wasn't just the absence of pain, it was the presence of possibility. She pulled out her phone and did something she had never done before. She called Caspian directly. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Thessaly." "Hi." She hadn't planned what to say. "I just wanted to tell you that I'm okay. Better than okay. I'm building something real, and it's working." There was silence then. "I know. Soledad keeps me updated. I know she does, but I wanted you to hear it from me. What you did, taking me away from there, giving me options, believing I was worth saving, it changed everything." "You changed everything," Caspian corrected quietly. "I just removed obstacles. You did the work. We can both be right." A sound that might have been a laugh. "We can. I don't know if I'll ever stop being grateful," Thessaly said. "Then don't stop. But also don't let gratitude become debt. You don't owe me your life. You owe yourself the life you're building." Thessaly smiled, feeling tears she didn't try to stop. "Deal." They talked for a few more minutes. About school, about work, about nothing important. Then they said goodbye, and Thessaly sat in her small office, in the nonprofit where she helped people like she had been, and felt something settle in her chest. Peace. Quiet, hard-won, real peace. 3 years after leaving her mother's apartment, Thessaly graduated from college with a degree in social work and a job offer from the nonprofit where she had worked throughout school. She stood on the stage in a cap and gown that felt borrowed, accepting a diploma that had her name printed on it, and looked out at the audience. Soledad was there, smiling wide, taking pictures. Next to her sat Caspian, looking uncomfortable in formal settings, but present anyway. They were the closest thing to family she had now. Not because they shared blood, but because they had chosen her and she had chosen them back. After the ceremony, standing in the sunshine while other graduates celebrated with their families, Thessaly approached Caspian. "Thank you for coming," she said. "I wouldn't have missed it. I mean it. Thank you for everything, for noticing, for intervening, for giving me a chance when you didn't have to." Caspian looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he said, "You know what I see when I look at you." "What?" "Someone who survived. Someone who chose to leave. Someone who took the chance they were given and built something worth living for. That's all you. I just opened a door. You walked through it." Thessaly felt tears well up, but didn't fight them. "I walked through it because you showed me it was there. Maybe, but you still had to walk." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment. Two people connected by an intervention that had changed both their lives, hers, obviously, but his too, in ways he would never fully articulate. "What happens now?" Caspian asked. "I start my job in 2 weeks. I have an apartment lined up, small, but mine. I have plans, a future, things I never imagined for myself." "Good, that's exactly what should happen." "And you, what happens to you?" Caspian smiled slightly. "I keep doing what I do, running my businesses, maintaining my territory, and occasionally noticing people who need noticing." "Thank you," Thessaly said one more time, because it still felt important to say. "You're welcome," Caspian said, the first time he had accepted her gratitude without deflecting. "Now go celebrate. You earned this." 5 years after leaving her mother's apartment, Thessaly sat in her own office in the nonprofit, now the director of youth services, having worked her way up through competence and dedication. She had a full caseload of kids she was helping navigate systems that had failed them. She had a team of social workers she trained and mentored. She had a life that was hers, complicated and challenging, and sometimes overwhelming but never terrifying. She had learned to sleep through the night most of the time, had learned to trust slowly, carefully, selectively, had learned that not everyone who offered help wanted something in return. She still saw Soledad regularly, monthly lunches where they caught up, where Soledad updated her on Caspian's latest ventures, where Thessaly shared her successes and frustrations. She saw Caspian less often, but when she did, it was always meaningful. He had become a quiet presence in her life, someone who checked in, who made sure she had what she needed, who asked nothing in return. "You don't have to keep looking out for me," she told him during one of their occasional dinners. "I know, but I choose to anyway. That's what people do for each other." "Is this what family feels like?" Thessaly asked, the question emerging before she could stop it. Caspian considered this. "I think family is what you make it. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty or care, but choosing to show up for each other, that's family, real family." And Thessaly realized he was right. She had built a family from scratch. Soledad, Caspian, Reverie, who had graduated but stayed in touch, the colleagues who had become friends, the mentors who had become guides. A family made of choice, not obligation, of care, not control, of mutual support, not debt. 7 years after leaving her mother's apartment, Thessaly received a letter. It had been forwarded through several addresses before finding her, and when she saw the return address, her hands started shaking. Her mother, she almost threw it away without opening it, almost didn't want to know what it said. But something in her needed closure, needed to know what this woman who had shaped so much of her early life wanted now, after all this time. She opened it. The letter was short. "Thessaly, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you should. I'm not writing to apologize. I don't think you'd believe it anyway. I'm writing because I need you to know something. I'm sick. The kind of sick that doesn't get better. The doctors say I have maybe a year, maybe less. I don't expect you to care. I don't deserve for you to care. I know what I did to you. I know what I was. But I wanted you to know that when I'm gone, you're free. Really free. You don't have to worry about me finding you or showing up or demanding anything. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just wanted you to have peace." Your mother Thessaly read it 3 times, feeling nothing at first, then everything at once. Anger that after everything, her mother's final communication was still somehow about control, about giving Thessaly permission to be free, as if that was hers to give. Grief for the mother she might have had, if addiction and bitterness hadn't twisted everything. Relief that soon there would be no possibility of confrontation, no chance of being dragged back. And, unexpectedly, a strange sort of peace. She called Caspian. "My mother is dying," she said without preamble. "She wrote to tell me. How do you feel about that?" "I don't know, a lot of things, all at once." "That's normal. She was your mother, even if she was terrible at it." "Should I go see her?" Silence, then. "Do you want to?" "No." "Then don't. You don't owe her your presence. You don't owe her anything." "But what if—" "Thessaly." His voice was firm but gentle. "She made her choices. You made yours. Your choice led to a life where you help people. Her choice led to drinking herself to death. You are not responsible for fixing her, forgiving her, or giving her closure. That's not your job." Thessaly closed her eyes, letting his words settle. "Okay. You're allowed to feel nothing. You're allowed to feel everything. You're allowed to grieve the mother you never had, but you're not required to give her anything more than she gave you, which was nothing. Exactly. Thessaly wrote a response that night. Simple, final. I got your letter. I hope you find peace, but I don't forgive you and I won't be coming. I built a good life without you. I saved myself. That's all I needed to do. Goodbye. She mailed it the next day and never heard from her mother again. 6 months later, Soledad called to tell her that her mother had died. Thessaly felt something shift in her chest. Not grief exactly, but a kind of closing. A door swinging shut on the part of her life that had been defined by fear. She didn't attend the funeral, didn't send flowers, just let her mother fade into the past, where she belonged. 10 years after leaving her mother's apartment, Thessaly stood in front of a room full of young social workers, teaching a workshop on trauma-informed care. She was 30 now, had a decade of experience, had helped hundreds of kids navigate systems and escape situations that were killing them slowly, had become the person she had needed when she was 19. Trauma changes how people move through the world, she told the group. Your clients will be hypervigilant, they'll calculate exits, they'll struggle to trust, they'll test boundaries to see if you're real or if you're like everyone else who failed them. She paused. The best thing you can do is be consistent. Show up when you say you will. Do what you promise. Don't make exceptions for bad behavior, but don't punish them for protecting themselves either. Just be steady, be safe, be real. A hand went up on Boy Shao. How do you know all this? Thessaly smiled slightly. Because I was one of them. And someone decided I was worth saving. Now I pay that forward. After the workshop, she drove to the neighborhood where she now lived. Nothing fancy, but clean and safe and hers. She had a small house with a garden she was learning to tend. Had a cat named Shadow who was skittish but learning to trust. Had a life that was quiet and full and completely her own. That evening, she sat on her porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sunset, and thought about the girl she had been. Silent, terrified, covered in bruises, convinced that was all she would ever be. That girl would never have believed this life was possible, but that girl had made a choice, had walked through a door a stranger held open, and had spent 10 years building something worth living for. Thessaly pulled out her phone and texted Caspian. Thank you, still, always. His response came a few minutes later. You're welcome, always. Simple words, but they carried the weight of a decade of choosing to see someone, choosing to act, choosing to believe that people could be more than their worst circumstances. Thessaly finished her coffee, went inside, and locked the door, not out of fear, but out of habit. A good habit, a safe habit. And for the first time in her life, she slept through the night without dreaming of violence. She had left behind the girl who calculated pain and became the woman who calculated possibilities, and that, finally, was freedom.